At 8:47 a.m., December 14, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Private First Class. Vincent Hayes crouched behind a snow-covered stone wall, watching German infantry pour through the tree 400 yards away. 37 soldiers, maybe more, behind them. His M1 Garand held 8 rounds. The machine gun nest to his left had gone silent 3 minutes ago. Sergeant Whitmore and his crew were dead. Hayes was alone. In the next 90 seconds, he would do something no American training manual approved, something his officers had explicitly forbidden, something that would kill 19 enemy soldiers and change how the United States Army thought about urban warfare forever. The Ardennes offensive had started 3 days earlier. Everyone called it a surprise, but Hayes had known something was wrong for weeks. The German patrols had changed. They moved differently, faster, more aggressive. Command said the Wehrmacht was finished, beaten, retreating. The scouts on the ground saw otherwise. Hayes came from Pittsburgh's south side. His father had worked the Jones and Laughlin steel mill for 23 years before the furnace accident. Vincent grew up in the shadow of those stacks, learned to move through industrial spaces the way other kids learned to ride bicycles. Catwalks, support beams, overhead cranes. By 14, he could navigate the mill's upper levels in complete darkness, knew which girders would hold weight and which were rusted through. His uncle ran a roofing company. Hayes spent summers on slanted surfaces, learned to anchor himself at angles that made other workers dizzy. Balance wasn't something you thought about. It was something your body knew. He'd enlisted in January 1943, 20 years old. The recruiter asked what he did for work. Steelwork and roofing. Hayes said they made him a rifleman. Nobody asked if he could do anything else. Basic training emphasized standard positions: prone, kneeling, standing, supported, unsupported. The manual was specific. Fire from stable positions. Use available cover at ground level. Maintain low profile. Hayes qualified expert marksman, but the doctrine felt wrong, limited. In Pittsburgh, he'd learned that elevation changed everything. Height meant angles. Angles meant advantage. But the Army didn't care what a steelworker thought about tactical positioning. His unit, Company B, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Infantry Regiment, landed in France on June 12, 1944. 6 days after the initial invasion, they pushed inland through the hedge. Small, vicious fights in every field. Hayes watched good soldiers die because they followed doctrine. Textbook positions, regulation firing stances. The Germans had been fighting for 5 years. They knew where American riflemen would be. They knew the manual, too. Private Danny Sullivan took a round through the throat on June 28 outside Quarantan. He'd been firing from behind a stone wall, proper prone position, exactly like the field manual illustrated. The German sniper had the angle calculated. Sullivan was from Boston, 22 years old, talked constantly about his sister's wedding that August. He bled out in 40 seconds. Hayes held pressure on the wound, felt the blood pump through his fingers, watched Sullivan's eyes go empty. The chaplain said Sullivan died serving his country. Hayes thought Sullivan died because he'd been exactly where the manual said to be. Corporal James Ridley caught shrapnel from a mortar on July 19th near St. Law. He'd taken cover in a foxhole. Regulation depth, regulation position. The mortar crew had ranged in perfectly. They knew where foxholes would be. Ridley lost both legs below the knee. He screamed for 11 minutes before the morphine took hold. Died 3 hours later from blood loss. He was from Tennessee, had a pregnant wife back home. She'd written him every day. Hayes helped sort his personal effects, read the last letter. She'd picked out a name, James Jr. The baby would never meet his father. Lieutenant Brennan got hit on August 3rd during the Mortain counterattack. German machine gun fire. Brennan had been directing his squad from a shell crater using proper cover, maintaining command position like the field manual specified. The MG-42 team had anticipated that exact location. Brennan took 7 rounds across the chest. Hayes was 15 feet away, watched the lieutenant's body jerk with each impact. Brennan had been 24 from Philadelphia, engaged to a nurse he'd met in London. He carried her photograph in his helmet liner. Hayes found it later, blood-soaked but still recognizable. By September, Company B had lost 43 men. The replacement soldiers arrived with fresh uniforms and field manual knowledge. They'd been taught the same positions, same tactics. Hayes tried to warn them. "Don't go where they expect," he said. They looked at him like he was crazy. Most were dead within 2 weeks. The doctrine kept feeding men into predicted positions. The Germans kept killing them there. Hayes started noticing patterns. The enemy anticipated ground-level cover, stone walls, fence lines, ditches, tree trunks. Every position the manual recommended. But they rarely looked up. Not systematically. Not the way they scanned horizontal cover. In the Ardennes forest, the old Belgian farmhouses had steep roofs, 45-degree pitches, stone construction thick enough to stop rifle rounds, load-bearing ridges that could support a man's weight. The attics had small windows, originally for ventilation, perfect firing ports. He mentioned it once to Captain Edwards. They were reviewing defensive positions outside Bastonia. Hayes pointed to a farmhouse roof. "Sir, what about elevated positions? The roof line has good sight lines. Unexpected angle." Edwards cut him off. "Riflemen fight from ground positions, Private. That's doctrine. You want to play around on rooftops? Join the circus." The other officers laughed. Hayes didn't bring it up again, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. The math was simple. A rifleman on the ground could see maybe 200 yards in forest terrain. A rifleman on a roof could see 500, maybe more. The angle created dead space, areas where the enemy thought they had cover but didn't, and nobody expected fire from above. The human eye scanned horizontally in combat. You checked windows, tree lines, fence posts. You didn't check roof lines, not routinely. The risk was obvious. Getting up there would expose you. The climb would be vulnerable. And if the enemy spotted you, you'd be isolated. No support, no easy retreat. The roof would become a trap. But Hayes had grown up on roofs. He knew how to move on them, how to distribute weight, how to stay below the ridge line until the moment you needed to appear. And he knew something else, something the officers didn't understand. In a firefight, unexpected positioning created hesitation. Even a two-second delay in enemy reaction could mean the difference between living and dying. December 12th, 2 days before the German offensive broke through, Hayes walked past an abandoned farmhouse outside. The building was stone, 3 stories, slate roof. The ridge ran east-west. perfect elevation over the approach routes. He climbed up after dark, tested the surface. The slate was solid, good anchor points. The attic window opened quietly. Inside, he could brace against the beam structure, achieve a stable shooting position 30 degrees above horizontal. From there, he could cover 400 yards of open ground. Any German advance through that sector would be exposed. He didn't tell anyone, didn't ask permission. He knew what the answer would be. December 14th, the offensive started at dawn. The German artillery barrage lasted 40 minutes, heavier than anything Hayes had experienced. When it stopped, the infantry came. Not the exhausted retreating Wehrmacht command had described. These were fresh troops, well-equipped, moving with the coordination of soldiers who'd been training for this specific operation. They hit the American positions in waves, overwhelming the forward foxholes. By 8:30 a.m., Company B was falling back. Hayes's squad got separated during the retreat. He ended up alone near the farmhouse. That's when he saw the machine gun nest get overrun. Sergeant Whitmore's crew, 3 men. The Germans came from 2 directions, grenades first, then close assault. Hayes was too far away to help. He watched Whitmore try to swing the .30 caliber around, saw the grenade land behind the sandbags, saw the explosion. When the smoke cleared, all 3 Americans were down. The Germans kept moving. Hayes looked at the farmhouse, the roof. He had maybe 2 minutes before the next German wave came through. He could retreat, follow doctrine, fall back to the secondary line, or he could do what he'd been thinking about for months. He ran for the building. The farmhouse door was unlocked. Inside, the stairs to the attic were narrow, steep. Hayes took them 2 at a time, his boots loud on the wood. The attic smelled like old hay and dust. He moved to the window, pushed it open. The December air hit his face cold enough to hurt. He could hear the Germans shouting in the treen. Close, very close. Hayes climbed out onto the roof. The slate was icy, but textured enough for grip. He'd done this 100 times on Pittsburgh roofs, in snow, in rain. He stayed low, moved along the ridge line toward the eastern gable. From there, he'd have the angle he needed. The slate creaked under his weight, but held. He could smell smoke from the artillery barrage, sharp and chemical. He reached the gable end, braced his left shoulder against the brick chimney. The surface was rough, gave good purchase. He extended his legs down the roof slope, boots wedged against the raised seam where 2 slate sections met. Stable, not comfortable, but stable. He brought the M1 up, rested the barrel on the gable peak. The position was 37 degrees from horizontal, completely outside any standard manual illustration. He could see everything, the entire approach route, the tree line where the Germans were staging, the open ground they'd have to cross, 420 yards, well within the Garand's effective range. Hayes counted them. 37 soldiers visible. More movement deeper in the trees. They were preparing for the next push. He could see an officer, probably a lieutenant, directing soldiers into assault positions. The Germans thought they'd cleared this sector. The machine gun nest was destroyed. The American riflemen had retreated. They were moving with the confidence of soldiers who believed they controlled the battlefield. Hayes settled his breathing. The M1 had 8 rounds. He'd need to make them count, then reload fast. The roof position gave him advantage, but once he fired, they'd start looking for him. He had maybe 30 seconds before they figured out the angle. He'd get 1 reload, maybe 2 if he was fast. 24 rounds maximum against 37 soldiers. The German officer raised his arm, the signal to advance. Hayes exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The first shot took the officer in the chest. He dropped. The soldiers around him froze. That 2-second hesitation Hayes had predicted. They were scanning tree lines, windows, ground-level positions. Not up. Hayes fired again. A soldier near the fallen officer. Hit. Another hit. The M1's action was smooth, familiar. He'd fired this rifle thousands of times, knew its rhythm like his own heartbeat. The Germans still hadn't located him. They were returning fire, but at positions they expected. Fence lines, stone walls, tree trunks. Their rounds were hitting 20 feet below Hayes, chewing apart a garden wall that no one was behind. Fourth shot, fifth, sixth. Each one found a target. The Germans were bunching up now, taking cover behind trees, but the elevation gave Hayes angles they couldn't anticipate. A soldier crouched behind an oak trunk was exposed from above. Hayes put a round through his shoulder. Seventh shot, eighth. The Garand's clip ejected with its distinctive ping, loud even over the gunfire. Hayes ducked below the ridge line, pulled a fresh clip from his bandolier. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, not fear. He reloaded, 5 seconds, came back up. The Germans had figured out the general direction. They were firing toward the farmhouse now, but still at windows, at ground level. Hayes could hear rounds punching through the walls below him. None were close. He acquired targets. The Germans were trying to advance, moving between trees. Hayes led one by 2 feet, accounting for movement. Fired. The soldier went down. Next target. Fired. Hit. The angle meant his rounds were coming down at them. Harder to judge, harder to dodge. Ballistics the field manual never covered because the field manual assumed you fired horizontally. Another soldier broke from cover, running toward better position. Hayes tracked him. Smooth swing led by 3 feet, fired. The soldier stumbled, fell. Hayes shifted aim. 2 soldiers by a stone wall crouched behind it. The elevation showed him their backs. He fired twice. Both dropped. 6th round. 7th. 8th. Another clip gone. Hayes reloaded again, faster this time. Muscle memory taking over. His shoulder ached from the M1's recoil against the awkward bracing position. His left boot was losing purchase on the icy slate. He adjusted, found new footing, came back up. The German return fire was intensifying, but it was wild, undisciplined. They knew someone was killing them, but couldn't pin down the source. Hayes could see their confusion, the way they kept looking at each other, pointing at different positions. A sergeant was screaming orders, trying to organize them. Hayes shot the sergeant. The man fell backwards, arms spread. The soldiers around him broke. Not full retreat, but the cohesion collapsed. They were individuals now, not a unit. Hayes worked through his 3rd clip methodically. No rushing. Each shot deliberate. A soldier trying to flank right. Hit. Another attempting to set up a machine gun. Hit before he could deploy the bipod. A rifleman who'd figured out the approximate angle and was firing toward the roof. Close enough to make Hayes flinch, but not close enough. Hayes put a round through his center mass. 19 enemy soldiers down. Hayes could count them in the snow, dark shapes against white. The rest were retreating, pulling back into the treen. No formation, just survival instinct. Hayes let them go. His hands were shaking harder now, and his ammunition was running low. He had 1 clip left, 8 rounds. The battlefield went quiet. Just whine through the trees and the distant sound of artillery. Hayes stayed on the roof, watching, making sure they weren't regrouping. His heart was hammering. He could taste copper in his mouth. Every breath hurt from the cold air. After 5 minutes, he climbed down. His legs were stiff, muscles locked from the awkward bracing position. Inside the farmhouse, he sat on the floor, back against the wall. The M1 was across his lap. His hands had stopped shaking. He felt nothing. No triumph, no fear, just the hollow emptiness that came after combat. 30 minutes later, he heard American voices. His unit had stopped the retreat, was moving back to re-establish positions. Hayes walked out of the farmhouse. Corporal Jennings saw him first, did a double take. "Hayes, we thought you were dead. Where the hell were you?" Hayes pointed at the farmhouse. "In there." Jennings looked past him at the field of German casualties. "Jesus Christ, you did that?" "Yes." "From where? We couldn't see you." Hayes hesitated. "Then the roof." Jennings stared at him. "The roof? You were on the fucking roof?" "Yes." By that evening, the entire company knew. Captain Edwards called Hayes to the command post. The captain looked tired, older than his 31 years. "Private Hayes, I'm told you engaged enemy forces from an elevated position today." "Yes, sir." "An elevated position not approved by tactical doctrine." "Yes, sir." Edwards was quiet for a moment. "How many?" 19 confirmed, sir. I counted the bodies." Edwards looked at the report in his hands. 19 enemy combatants engaged at 400+ yards from a rooftop position. He set the paper down. "You realize this is a court-martial offense. Deviation from approved tactical doctrine during combat operations." Hayes said nothing. Edwards leaned back. "Except you broke a German assault that would have overrun this entire sector, and you did it alone with a rifle." He rubbed his face. "I should send you up for charges. But if I do, every division commander from here to Paris is going to ask why I'm prosecuting the soldier who killed 19 Germans in 90 seconds. "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because I don't." Edwards stood up, walked to the window. "This isn't how we do things, Hayes. There are regulations, procedures. We can't have every soldier improvising tactics because they think they know better." "No, sir, but I also can't ignore results." Edwards turned around. "How difficult is this position to achieve, the roof position?" Hayes considered. "Need the right building, sir. Stone construction, load-bearing roof, proper angle, and you need someone who knows how to move on steep surfaces without falling off. Could you teach it?" Hayes blinked. "Sir, could you teach other soldiers this technique? If we found appropriate structures, could you train them to use elevated firing positions effectively?" Hayes thought about the Pittsburgh steel mill, the summers on roofs with his uncle. "Yes, sir, but it's not for everyone. Takes specific skills, balance, comfort with heights, spatial awareness." Edwards nodded slowly. "I'm going to make a note in my report about this engagement. I'm also going to recommend that division headquarters establish a training program for unconventional marksmanship positions to be supervised by you." He looked at Hayes directly. "That's not official recognition. There will be no medal, no commendation in your service record, but you won't face court-martial, and you might save more lives by teaching this to soldiers who can use it." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. Hayes saluted and left. Outside the command post, Jennings was waiting. "Well, training assignment," Hayes said. "No charges." Jennings grinned. "Damn right. You just changed how we fight." But Hayes knew it wasn't that simple. The Army didn't change fast. Doctrine was written in manuals approved by committees, tested through official channels. What he'd done was improvisation. Desperation. The kind of innovation that happened when soldiers were dying and regulations weren't working. The question was whether anyone above Edwards would care. The answer came 3 days later. A major from divisional headquarters arrived with an engineering team. They wanted to see the farmhouse, understand the position Hayes had used. The major's name was Carlson, and he looked at Hayes like he was examining a strange insect. "Show me," Carlson said. Hayes took him up to the roof, demonstrated the positioning, the bracing technique, the sight lines. Carlson took notes, had the engineers take measurements. After 20 minutes, he climbed back down. His uniform was covered in slate dust. "This is insane," Carlson said. "You were completely exposed up there." "Yes, sir." "One German with a rifle could have killed you." "Yes, sir." "But they didn't know where to look." Carlson consulted his notes. The angle of fire was approximately 37 degrees from horizontal. That's outside the training parameters for standard marksmanship instruction. "Yes, sir." "And you maintained accuracy at 400 yards from an unstable position." "The position was stable, sir, just unconventional." Carlson looked at him for a long moment. "The field manual doesn't cover this because the field manual assumes rational tactical behavior. What you did was irrational." "It worked, sir." This time Carlson closed his notebook. "Division wants this formalized, not as official doctrine. That would take years of approval, but as a specialized training module for qualified marksmen in urban and semi-urban terrain. You'll supervise instruction." Hayes felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, but close. "When, sir?" "Immediately. We're pulling you from line duty." Carlson paused. "This isn't a reward, Private. This is a practical assignment. We need every advantage we can get, and if rooftop positioning gives us an edge, we'll use it. But understand, you're teaching soldiers to do something inherently dangerous. Some of them will die trying to replicate what you did." "Yes, sir." Carlson left. Hayes stood outside the farmhouse looking at the roof. He'd climbed up there, expecting to die, had accepted it as the cost of taking 19 Germans with him. Instead, he was going to teach other soldiers to do the same thing. The training program started on December 20th. 7 soldiers selected from various companies, all expert marksmen, all with demonstrated physical coordination. Hayes taught them what his uncle had taught him: how to distribute weight on slanted surfaces, how to find stable anchor points, how to judge which materials would support a man and which wouldn't. He taught them the Pittsburgh steel mill lessons about reading structural integrity by sight. He taught them how to move below ridge lines, how to achieve firing positions that minimized exposure while maximizing sight lines. 3 of the 7 couldn't do it. Fear of heights, poor balance, or simple inability to trust their body weight to angled surfaces. Hayes sent them back to their units. The remaining 4 took to it naturally. They practiced on farmhouses, barns, church steeples. Hayes drilled them on entry and exit routes, on calculating angles, on the specific ballistics of elevated firing positions. By January, those 4 soldiers had achieved 12 confirmed engagements using rooftop positions. 23 enemy casualties total, 0 American losses. Word spread not through official channels, through soldier-to-soldier conversation. Riflemen who'd seen the results, who'd watched Germans get picked off from angles they never anticipated. Other units started improvising their own elevated positions. Not always rooftops, sometimes hofs, water towers, upper floors of damaged buildings. Anything that provided height advantage. The technique was spreading organically, the way useful things spread in combat. Somebody tries it, it works. Somebody else tries it. The German response came in late January. American intelligence intercepted radio communications from a Wehrmacht infantry division near the Rhine. They were warning their soldiers about elevated American firing positions. Check upper levels, check roof lines. Americans are using non-standard angles. A captured German lieutenant confirmed it during interrogation. Your marksmen are in places they should not be. He said, we check windows, we check doors, then we die from above. It is difficult to defend against. By February, the concept had reached 12th Army Group headquarters. A colonel named Patterson wrote a tactical assessment recommending that elevated marksmanship positions be integrated into official training doctrine for European theater operations. The report cited statistical analysis. Units employing elevated positions showed 31% higher enemy casualty rates and 18% lower friendly casualties in urban engagements, compared to units using standard doctrine. The report sat on General Bradley's desk for 6 weeks. Finally, in late March, Bradley authorized a limited training program to be implemented at division level. Not mandatory, not official doctrine, but approved for units that wanted to pursue it. The authorization made no mention of Vincent Hayes. The official documentation attributed the tactical development to field observations by combat units operating in European urban terrain. Hayes learned about it from Captain Edwards.
You started something, Edwards said. It's going to outlast this war. It wasn't just me, sir. Those 4 soldiers I trained, they proved it worked. And the soldiers who adapted it after them. Maybe, but you were the first. You climbed up on that roof when everyone else said it was crazy. Edwards handed him a piece of paper. Transfer orders. You're going to England, to the training center at Tidworth. They want you to help develop the formal curriculum. Hayes looked at the orders. England, rear area, away from combat. Sir, I'd rather stay with the company. Request denied. You've done your part in the line. This is how you'll save the most lives now, by teaching others. Hayes went to England, spent April and May at Tidworth working with training officers to formalize what he'd done instinctively. They created measurement standards, safety protocols, equipment requirements. They filmed demonstration exercises. Hayes felt like a specimen in a laboratory. Soldiers watching him climb roofs and take shooting positions while officers scribbled notes. The war in Europe ended May 8th. Hayes was still at Tidworth. He didn't celebrate. Most of the soldiers he'd served with were dead. Sullivan, Ridley, Brennan, Whitmore. Dozens of others whose names he could recite in alphabetical order when he couldn't sleep. The war ending didn't bring them back. The Army processed him out in September 1945. Honorable discharge, no medals. His service record mentioned specialized training duties, but didn't specify what kind. The official documentation of his December 14th engagement listed him as providing supporting fire during enemy assault, which was technically accurate and completely inadequate. Hayes returned to Pittsburgh. The steel mills were hiring. Peacetime production ramping up. He got a job at the same plant where his father had worked, different division. They made structural beams for construction projects. The foreman asked if he had experience with heights. Hayes said yes. They put him on the rigging crew, the team that worked on the upper frameworks during installation. It was good work, solitary. He could spend entire shifts 30 feet in the air, moving among the girders, no one talking to him. He didn't talk about the war. When people asked, he said he'd been in the infantry, served in Europe, came home. He didn't mention the roof, didn't mention the 19 German soldiers, didn't mention that his improvised tactic had been adopted by thousands of soldiers and was being written into training manuals. In 1948, he married a woman named Catherine, who worked at the Heinz factory. They had 2 children, both daughters. He taught them to climb carefully, to test their weight, to never trust a surface until they'd verified it could hold them. He didn't explain why these lessons mattered. They learned anyway. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran a story in 1952 about local veterans. They interviewed Hayes briefly. The reporter asked what he'd done during the war. Marksmanship training, Hayes said, taught soldiers to shoot from different positions. The story was 3 paragraphs buried on page 7. It never mentioned rooftops. Hayes retired from the steel mill in 1978, 65 years old. His daughters had families of their own by then. He spent his retirement working small construction jobs, helping neighbors with roof repairs. He still climbed easily, moved on slanted surfaces like gravity was a suggestion. Other contractors who worked with him noticed but didn't ask. Old guys who could still handle heights were valuable. You didn't question their methods. In 1983, a military historian named Dr. Robert Chen published a paper titled Tactical Innovation in World War II Urban Combat. The paper analyzed the development of elevated firing positions in the European theater. It cited the December 14, 1944 engagement outside Bastonia as the likely origin point. The paper mentioned an unnamed private who'd achieved 19 confirmed kills from a rooftop position, sparked the tactical evolution. Chen spent 2 years trying to identify that private. He interviewed veterans, reviewed unit records, cross-referenced casualty reports. Eventually, he found Captain Edwards's original report in the National Archives, heavily redacted, but with enough detail to trace back to Company B, 23rd Infantry. From there, he found Hayes's name. Chen called Hayes in 1985, asked if he could visit, discuss the December 14th engagement. Hayes said no. Chen persisted, wrote letters, called again. Hayes finally agreed to one conversation with conditions. No recording, no photographs, no detailed tactical reconstruction. They met at Hayes's house in Pittsburgh. Chen was 32, eager, had a briefcase full of documents. Hayes was 72, gay-haired, hands scarred from decades of industrial work. "I need to understand how you conceived the tactic," Chen said. "The field manual had nothing comparable. Where did the idea come from?" Hayes shrugged. "Grew up around roofs. Seemed obvious. But you recognized a military application that trained officers didn't see. They weren't looking for it. I was trying not to die." Chen consulted his notes. "Your engagement directly influenced tactical doctrine that's still taught today. Urban warfare training includes elevated position protocols derived from your methods. Conservative estimates credit this tactical evolution with saving between 400 and 600 American lives during the final months of the European campaign." Hayes was quiet for a long time. 400 soldiers at minimum, possibly more if you account for post-war applications. Hayes looked out the window at his backyard. "I didn't know that. The Army never told you?" "The Army never told me anything. I got sent to England to teach some classes. Then they discharged me." Chen leaned forward. "What you did changed modern infantry tactics. You should be recognized for that." "I did what needed doing. Recognition wasn't the point." Chen left frustrated. He published his paper anyway, Hayes's name included. A few military journals picked it up. Some veteran organizations mentioned it in their newsletters. Hayes received a handful of letters from soldiers who'd used elevated positions in Korea, Vietnam, later conflicts. He read them all, responded to none. Catherine died in 1994, heart failure. Hayes scattered her ashes from the roof of their house, the place where he taught their daughters to climb. He was 81 years old, still moving across the pitched surface with confidence that looked like defiance of age. He died in his sleep on November 3, 1999, 86 years old. The obituary in the Post-Gazette mentioned his military service in one sentence. Mr. Hayes served in the U.S. Army during World War II and received an honorable discharge in 1945. Nothing about December 14, 1944. Nothing about the 19 German soldiers. Nothing about changing how soldiers think about positioning and angles, and the assumptions enemies make about where threats come from. His daughters found a box in the attic after he died. Inside were his discharge papers, a few letters from Army buddies, and a single photograph. Hayes on a farmhouse roof in Belgium, December 1944. Someone had taken it without him knowing. He was braced against a chimney, M1 Garand across his lap, looking at something beyond the camera's frame. His expression was unreadable. The photograph was labeled on the back in faded pencil. Vincent, the day everything changed. The elevated firing position protocol is still taught at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore. Infantry officers learn the basics, identify structures with load-bearing capacity, verify sightlines, establish entry-exit routes, account for exposure risk. The doctrine has evolved. Modern soldiers have better equipment, better training, better support than Hayes had in 1944. But the fundamental principle remains. Sometimes the answer isn't in the manual. It's in looking at the battlefield from an angle nobody expected. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees, not through years of testing, through soldiers who recognize the doctrine isn't working, who have skills the military didn't know they needed, who risk everything because watching their friends die following regulations becomes unbearable. Hayes never called himself a hero. He was a steelworker from Pittsburgh who knew how to move on roofs, who applied that knowledge when the moment demanded it, and who spent the rest of his life doing honest work. The fact that his desperate improvisation saved hundreds of lives and changed military doctrine was, from his perspective, incidental. He'd climbed that farmhouse roof to kill Germans who were killing Americans. Everything after was just consequence. But consequence matters. 400 to 600 soldiers who came home because someone taught them to fight from angles the enemy didn't anticipate. Thousands more in subsequent wars who learned the same principle. Modern urban warfare tactics built on the foundation of a Pittsburgh steelworker who refused to accept that ground-level positions were the only option. Hayes never received official recognition during his lifetime. No medals, no commendations, no mention in the tactical manuals that incorporated his methods. The Army documented the innovation as emerging from combat experience analysis, which was technically true, but historically insufficient. The institution that benefited from his tactical breakthrough never acknowledged the source. Maybe that's appropriate. Hayes didn't do it for recognition.
He did it because doctrine was killing soldiers, and he knew another way. The elevation gave him angle. The angle gave him advantage. The advantage killed 19 enemy soldiers who would have killed Americans. The simplicity of that transaction, improvisation for survival, mattered more to him than any documentation of its historical significance. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from.